nearby. Not 20 feet behind them, the behemoth of the 33rd Legion still marched grimly through the eternal forest. Marcellinus looked again at the mourning soldiers. He was intruding on their pain, and nothing he could say or do would ease it. "Just a few moments longer," he said to Scapax. "Then everyone goes back to the column." The men on guard looked relieved. Scapax cleared his throat. "Burial detail, sir?" Marcellinus looked again into the underbrush that surrounded them. Pale light filtered through the trees. The last thing he wanted was to have his men exposed any longer than they had to be. But the 7th cohort with the baggage train must be only minutes away. "Their choice," he said. "They can wait by the column, put the bodies onto one of the wagons, and bury them tonight. Or say their goodbyes now and be done." The centurion saluted. As Marcellinus turned to leave the glade, the trumpet sounded again, one far to the west, followed by another just a few hundred feet away, a complicated sequence of notes. It was a message from Corbulo, his first tribune. Marcellinus was needed at the head of his legion. Another obstacle, and clearly something their engineers could not tackle easily. Marcellinus's shoulders and back ached from riding. Worse was the low throb of tiredness behind his eyes. Pulling himself wearily back into the saddle, he drummed his heels against his horse's flanks. As he rode forward, the legion was already slowing to a halt. Pallius Scapax's voice boomed out across the sloping hillside. "First cohort, stand to! Eyes up! Spears out!" The men of the first fell into battle formation, 3 ranks in close order. Tired soldiers set the hafts of their heavy pila in the ground and held them angled outward. Archers stood with bows strung and quivers of arrows at their feet, blinking owlishly at the shallow valley. The evening breeze ruffled the crests on their steel helmets. No enemy was in sight, but men had died today, and this was hostile territory. The first was mustered to repel any potential attacks while the slaves and the soldiers of the other cohorts made camp. The Castra was a roving town that recreated itself daily in its own image. They rebuilt it identically every afternoon, occupied it for one night only, then abandoned it the next morning. Civilization on the march through Nova Hesperia. The engineers had chosen a site only a couple miles past the Legion's sudden stop. As usual, it was a large open area near a river, on rising ground with little nearby cover that could be exploited by attackers. Even before the 1st and 2nd had arrived, the Engineer Corps had measured and marked with a knotted rope where the streets would be laid out. Now the meadow became a hive of activity. Up went the ramparts, earthworks 6 feet high, around the perimeter surrounded by a deep defensive ditch. Down came any trees unfortunate enough to be within the square, their wood pressed into use to construct the raised guard platforms at each corner and above the 4 gates. Up went the tents, down went the latrines. Finally, up would go the 5 temples obligatory for feeding the Legion's faiths: the Mithraic Temple, the shrines to Cybele and Sol Invictus, the open-air altar and prayer rail of the Christ Risen, and the small but rather forbidding statue of Jupiter Imperator, which had more presence than any of the real-life imperators Marcellinus had served. The camp was square, with streets constructed on a grid. Its alignment was as constant as its arrangement, with the wide main street called the Cardo, aligned north-south so that the evening and morning light shone down the long cross streets named for the cohorts of the centuries that had lived on them. The rank and file lived 8 men to a tent, and Marcellinus's own praetorium tent formed the center of the camp. Latrines, the field hospital, stables, the smithy, and the armory were arrayed around the rim with open areas at the corners for the slaves. As always, Marcellinus walked the streets as the camp took shape, receiving reports from his tribunes and centurions.